do I mean by that? Let me just say, I just have a figure here. I don't know, many of you may be familiar with this figure. This is a really interesting mosaic that I found in Gaziantep Zoyukma Museum, a fascinating museum, uh, as beautiful as Burdur Museum there, the archaeological museum. You know what this is telling us? Zeus, who was disguised like a bull, boğa, orada görüyorsunuz. Zeus, the Greek, ancient Greek god, the god of all the gods and goddesses. He was disguised like a bull to kidnap a woman that he loved so much. So this is the story of Zeus kidnapping an Asian woman who was called Europa. So Europe was actually in the mythology was an Asian woman, was an Asian princess. So the reason why I'm telling you this story is that the boundaries between East and West, the boundaries between Europe and Asia are actually constructed and they don't really exist in reality. So in the first place, according to the mythology, this is just, of course, a story, but I think it's a really nice story telling us that, let's say, Europe was Asian. So let's not really invest in these boundaries. Let's not invest in these borders that were imposed on us by modernity, by capitalism, by enlightenment, by all these things. So let's just go back and take a look at the history of Europe in a very short way. So, Greek mythology, we talked about what Europe meant to be. She was the daughter of Agenor, the king of Lebanon, with whom Zeus fell in love. And Zeus kidnapped her, disguising himself like a bull. So this is just a mythological explanation of Europe. And after the ancient Greek empires, disappeared, we have Roman Empire, which also encompassed the European continent to a great extent. And then Roman Empire was so strong, but after a while, Roman Empire was divided into two, Byzantium and the West Roman Empire. So Roman Empire was losing its power. And then in the 4th century, it was interesting to see that the Roman Empire, in order to stop its decline, it has made a strategic choice declaring Christianity as the official religion of the Roman Empire. Because in those days, starting from the birth of Christ, Christianity was becoming a very strong religion, winning the hearts and minds of people in Asia Minor, in the Middle East, in the Roman Empire, etc., etc. So in the 4th century, the Roman Empire, in order to stop its political and geographical decline, decided that they declare Christianity as the official religion of the empire. So it was an ideological choice to win the hearts and minds of people who were becoming more and more Christian. I wonder if you guys all know where this decision was actually taken. Just remember a few months ago, the Pope visited Iznik, Nicaea, where actually the Roman Empire, gathered all the bishops and religious clerics to make this decision. This decision was made in Nicaea, Iznik, back in the 4th century. So Anatolia Asia Minor is a very important place for Christianity, of course. And then later, Europe or the Roman Empire has become more and more Christian. Still back then, we didn't have the notion of Europe. There was the notion of Christendom, which means that all Roman Empire was a Christian empire, especially after the fifth century. So if you just go a bit further, you realize that Christian Europe was becoming a bit of problematic. So it was 11th century, 12th century. The boundaries between East and West were becoming erected, were becoming a bit stronger. And you remember from your history classes that there were crusaders trying to colonize Asia Minor, the Middle East, in the name of Christianity, fighting against the Turks, the Muslims, Seljuks, and then Ottoman Empire in the 12th, 13th, 14th centuries. But let me just underline here something very essential. It's often the case that we assume, or everyone assumes, that Crusaders Crusaders war was waged against only the Muslims. So common knowledge is that the Crusaders were fighting against the Muslims. Let's not forget about the fact that Crusaders were the Catholics in those days. There was no Protestantism. Catholics were the Catholics who were fighting against the Muslims in the Middle East, in Anatolia, but they were also fighting against the Orthodox people who were one of the largest populations of Anatolia and the Balkans. So let's not, have this prejudice that Crusaders was only against the Muslims. No, Crusaders also killed thousands of Orthodox people, especially in Anatolia and in the Balkans. The reason why the Crusaders, the Catholics, thought that the Orthodox were the dissidents. They were the heretics who left original Christianity, who were assumed to be the Catholics in the first place. So let's not forget about this fact. And then, as you know, in the 16th century, in Europe, Christianity was not only composed of the Catholics and, of course, the Orthodox, especially in the Balkans, in East Europe. The Protestants also appeared starting from the 16th century. And again, here, the story of Martin Luther, who was the founder of Protestantism in Germany, his story is also very interesting because, according to some people, Protestantism was very much inspired by Sunni Islam, which was becoming very, very popular in the Balkans and in East Europe. Because, if you look at the Catholic Church, for instance, Catholic Church is full of, hierarchy, full of high arts, aesthetics, full of power. When you get into a Catholic Church, you feel yourself as a prayer, as an individual, oppressed by the power of arts, by the power of all these images, all these symbols and everything. But if you go to a mosque, you don't see any of these images. You don't see any hierarchy. There is only a building, and there is the spirituality in that building, and there is only the prayer, individual prayer, and God. So this is a rather democratic constellation, much more democratic than the Catholic Church would offer to the individual prayer. So Protestantism is also similar to Sunni Islam. If you go to Protestant churches, most often you will see that they're also like the mosques where you will not find any image of Christ, any image of great artistic elaboration, expositions, etc. So there is simply simplicity. There is simplicity, there is modesty. So in this sense, it is often argued that Martin Luther, the founder of Protestantism, was very much inspired by Sunni Islam, which was in those days becoming more and more popular in the Balkans and also in East Europe. And then if you just follow the history, you see that history of Europe is like the story of Phoenix, the bird Phoenix, Anka kuşu. Phoenix is always born and then burns itself and then is reborn out of its ashes. So Europe is a story of up and down. Europe is a story of a constant story of unification and disunification. Europe is a constant story of integration and disintegration. So this is what Europe is all about. Of course, we can also refer to the colonization period, industrialization period, and Europe has also witnessed great wars, First World War, Second World War, which was in the end the outcome of the quest for power. It was both wars were the outcomes of the process of colonialism in a way. So, of course, you will remember the French Revolution, previously World War I, World War II, causing the death of millions of people, causing the rise of Holocaust, Nazism, fascism, etc., etc. So out of these wars, what comes out is the European Union. We will come back to that. European Union, which was, the history of which goes back to 1950s, to the aftermath of the Second World War, is simply a peace process, is simply a peace project. So there is a lot to learn from the European Union as a peace project, as a stability project, as a harmonization project. So during the Cold War period, European Union has become a very great power, mostly economic power, and then later a cultural power and a political power. So this was a very small, short, history of Europe. Let's just go back to the Middle Ages, to the medieval Europe, to walk you through some of the important elements which actually constitutes what Europe is today, or what the European Union is all about today. So if you just go back to the Middle Ages, between the 5th and the 15th century, what we know about Europe was that Europe was simply a Christendom. It was the land of Christianity. We did not use the word, or the people in those days, in those centuries, did not use the word Europe or European. Rather, the term to be used in those almost 1,000 years or 1,000 years, it was Christendom. So it was the land of Christianity. And then this land of Christianity has changed dramatically after the 14th and 15th century, starting with the rise of Renaissance, Reformation, and Enlightenment. And starting from the 14th and 15th century, we have seen that there was a critique of this Christian Europe, leading to the rise of a secular Europe, where the worldly affairs were differentiated from the religious affairs. So secularization is basically, in Turkish, if we just need to make a translation of secularization, that means çağdaşlaşma, çağdaşlaşma, which means, which is actually quite different from laicism. Laicism is a political ideology, but secularism is a cultural, social thing, which is coming from bottom up. But laicism is a political project which comes from top down. So there is this differentiation you guys need to make, because it's often the case in Turkish context. Secularism, the notion of secularism, is often interchangeably being used like laicism. These are two different concepts. You should also be aware of that. You can read a lot about this. It's often the case that in Turkey we are interchangeably using these two concepts, which is totally wrong, which is actually causing a lot of trouble in our everyday life. So anyway, Renaissance, going back to the 14th century, 15th century, and then Reformation is important. That is when the Protestant church appears. That is when the nation states start to come out, especially in the 17th century. And of course, most importantly, we see the rise of enlightenment. We see the rise of scholarly works, science, arts, aesthetics, uh, challenging the former power, the former authority of the Catholic Church. So these three processes made a great impact in the foundation of modern, secular, liberal Europe, so to speak. If you just look at the map here, you will see the medieval Europe, where the Holy Roman Empire was the greatest power. France was there, Spain was there, and also some other smaller empires, and also the Byzantium Empire in the eastern parts. So let's just take a breath here, and then let's try to answer this question. Is Europe just coming out of the blue? I mean, is Europe really so different from the Arabs, from the Turks, from Islam, from the Muslims? Do they have a completely different world? I mean, do they come out of a completely different civilization? No. In history, there is always connection, there is always dialogue, there is always interaction between different groups of people. For instance, the Turks who came to Anatolia back in the 11th century, 10th century, or 12th century, the Turks learned a lot from the Arabs, from the Rums, from the Byzantium, from the Christians living here, but they also brought a lot of things themselves from Central Asia, which was also very actually, important, because they also learned a lot from the Chinese. Arabs did the same. Arabs, they also have great civilization. They learned a lot from different groups of people, and they, established states in Spain, in Andalusia. They established states in Sicily, Sicilia, in the Middle East, in Anatolia. They even tried to, occupy Istanbul, Constantinople, back in those days, 6th century, 7th century, but they couldn't manage that. So if you look at the history from the perspective of mobility of people, mobility of tribes, mobility of ethnic groups, mobility of empires, mobility of nation states, etc., etc., you will see that we always learn from each other. Even in times of wars, we learn a lot from the other people that we are fighting against, because there is trade everywhere, there is interaction, there is dialogue, there is conversation, and for instance, we know that even before Christophe Colomb, who is known to have, discovered Americas back in the 15th century, there are evidences that the Vikings were already there in North Americas, for instance, in the 11th century, 10th century. So Vikings already discovered Americas before, but in the written history, we don't really find that much. And also, if you look at the Arab traders, it is also known today that the Arab traders were there in Latin America and North America much earlier than Christophe Colomb, discovered Americas. So you see, there was a world before Christophe Colomb, and let's also, not forget about these facts. So here, I'll just basically try to, since the time is running and we have EU as well, let me just say a few words about the impact of the Arabs, of the Turks, of the Muslims on the formation of the European civilization, on the formation of Europe as such. During the Christianity years, between the 5th century and all the way up to even 14th century, we know that the ancient Greek writings, ancient Roman writings, they were all destroyed by the Catholic Church. So the Europeans did not know anything, did not remember anything about the ancient Greece, about the ancient Roman Empire. But it was thanks to the Arabs who translated, thanks to the Turks as well, who translated all the works of the ancient Greek civilization and the Roman civilization into their own languages, right? So the classical Greek and Roman, works were already restored in the Arabic and the Turkish libraries in different parts of the Middle East and the East. So when the Enlightenment started, when the Reformation started, what the Europeans did was to translate all these ancient Greek and Roman works from Arabic to their own languages. So thanks to the Arabs and the Turks and the Muslims who actually restored the already existing Greek and Roman knowledge. So this is a really important phenomena that we need to keep in mind, because this is also the fact that the Arabs and the Turks had a great impact on the restoration of the secular Europe in a way. So what did the Arabs do? What did the Turks do? Astronomy, medicine, geography, timekeeping, historiography, all these things are very important discoveries, inventions that these communities did so far in those days, at least. So through the contact, through the exchange, through trade, through wars, etc., this information, this knowledge has, of course, shifted from one place to another, from the Mediterranean, from North Africa, from Anatolia, to places like Venice, Florence, to Cadiz, Spain, to the Mediterranean, North Mediterranean ports and cities. They were the important hubs of the emerging European Renaissance and Enlightenment. So these cities in Spain, in Italy, etc., are very important cities where the Muslims and Christians interacted with each other. They learned from each other. They also thought each other in different ways. Since I don't really have so much time, I'm not going to get into very much into detail, but just for your information, for instance, the transaction, the trading transaction, havale, it's an Arabic word, this havale in the first place was introduced by the Arabs to the Normans, who were then in Sicily, and then the Normans learned how to make havale from the Arabs, and then they took it to France and to the United Kingdom. Or trust the ship, trusteeship in Turkish, mütevelli. This is also something that the Europeans learned from the Arabs in Sicily and in Spain. You see how we learn from each other, how the Europeans learn from the Arabs, Muslims, and the Turks through this trade connection and transaction. Just to give you an example, Toledo was a great city in Spain where the Jews, Christians, and the Muslims lived together. The works of the Arabs were translated into different languages, etc., etc., where medicine was really developing, astronomy was developing. So it's always good. I mean, let's not forget about this. It's always good to interact with the others. You know, homogeneity is no good. Cultural homogeneity is not good. If we are all the same, that's no fun. But if there is interaction between differences, then there is, of course, tension, but there is also the potential to learn from the others, from the other people, from the other ethnicities, from the other cultures, from the other religions. So this is something I think Europe shows us. They learned a lot from the other cultures, the other civilizations. Here, there are more details about what the Arabs, what the Muslims, what the Turks introduced to Western civilization: mathematics, geography, astronomy, alchemistry, paper, medicine, etc., etc. And also, the Europeans learned to use some of the items which were then luxury, bath, gardens, perfume, carpets, the use of sugar, gül suyu, rose water, saffron, rice, spices, etc., etc. You see how this culinary gastronomic interaction was also very decisive for the emergence of today's Europe in a way, textile, etc., etc. So I think this is, what I try to underline here. When we talk about Europe today, we should not only talk about a group of people with Christianity, with a different religion, or with atheism, or with a very distinct culture. No, they learned a lot from the other cultures, as we learned also from the other cultures as well. This is something really to keep in mind. For instance, I don't know, I hope you one day you go to Venice. This is Venice in Italy. This is the Turkish palace, which served until quite recently, which is still there. This was the place where the Italians were doing trade of the goods coming from the Ottoman Empire. So this is the place. This is the bazaar. This is the markets. The Italians were, cooperating or with exchanging money and goods with the Arabs. This was the Turkish warehouse. And of course, printing press was a decisive moment in the European civilization, which goes back to the 15th century when the Protestant church was established. The first thing that Martin Luther did, was to translate the Bible from Latin language to German language. So it is like translating Quran from Arabic language, which is in the hands of a minority group of people, imams or muezzins or whatever. But when you translate it into your own local language, you actually make sure that you create a homogeneous group of people who can read the same text, who can imagine the same stories, who can imagine, the same things. So this is how actually the nation states started to appear with the homogenization of culture, with the homogenization of the mindset through the use of print capitalism. So I'm not really going to go that much into detail. Soon I'll just give a break. Let me just conclude the first section here with the story of Martin Luther. I think this is really fascinating because we often, let's say, the Europeans often assume that Martin Luther was a very anti-Ottoman, anti-Muslim, anti-Islam person. He was the founder of the Protestant church, which is true. I mean, he was very anti-Turk, anti-Muslim, anti-Ottoman. Uh, but it was so in his late writings. In the early writings of Martin Luther, some of the European scholars find out that he was actually inspired by Sunni Islam because of the reasons that I previously talked about. Sunni Islam was not hierarchical, Sunni Islam was horizontal and democratic. There was no clerical class between God and individual prayer. So it was a very democratic faith. So he was really fascinated by this quality of Sunni Islam. And it was in a way, Protestantism, according to this European scholars, Protestantism was a kind of Islamization of the Catholic Church. This is really, something very fascinating to hear such argumentation from some European scholars saying that Protestantism is a kind of Islamization of the Sunni Islamization of the Catholic Church. You see, how you cannot claim that there are so strict boundaries between Islam and West, between Islam and Christianity. Those boundaries do not really exist that much. Those boundaries are actually ideologically created, ideologically imposed on us to separate us from the other people who who believe in another religion. Anthropologically speaking, religions also learn, especially the monotheistic religions, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. These are all Abrahamic religions. They all have the same roots, same origins, so they have millions of similarities rather than, just a few differences. So this was just the, first part of the lecture, and I think we can give a, short break. Hüseyin Hocam, and then we can
Yes, hocam.
continue 10 minutes later. But let me
Okay,
just
hocam.
say about this notion of, for our students, especially in literature, we talk about toleration a lot, right? Hoşgörü, tahammül, etc. This is also something that the Ottomans actually uh, thought to the Europeans. It goes back to the 15th century when the Ottomans, took the Balkans, Romania, for instance, in Hungary. They learned it from the Ottomans because Ottomans used the Medina document when Muhammad, migrated from Mecca to Medina. He introduced this document saying that now Muslims are in majority in Medina, but Muslims will let the other religions survive, keeping their own faith intact. So this was the idea of toleration in the name of Islam, letting the other religions live as they were pleased. So this is also something that the Europeans in Germany, in France, in Spain started to do after the 16th century. So this is why the notion of toleration was something that was introduced by the Ottomans to the European civilizations. The reason why I'm telling you all these things that boundaries are not really there as claimed. Boundaries are constructed. So we all teach each other. We all learn from each other. So this is, I think, the first part of the lecture, and then we can continue in 10 minutes, Hüseyin
Okay,
Hocam.
hocam. Thank you very much, hocam, for the valuable information. And now we will have a short break time, as you said, and then we will go on in the second part of the webinar. I will send you the link of the second part,
Okay.
hocam.
So we will
Okay.
close this down off, and then I will open up the
Yes.
other one. Okay. Thank you,
Yes,
hocam.
hocam. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much. See you.
Thank you. See you.